Minnesota, the northernmost of the continental United States. Minnesota has been a reliably left-leaning state for over a century and consistently been supportive of civil rights. However, Minnesota is partly responsible for the worst Supreme Court decision in history. Here's how Minnesota, depending on how you look at it, may have somewhat been responsible for the start of the US Civil War. First off, we need some background. I won't go into the entire history of slavery in the United States. Instead, I will start this in the 1830s. A man named Peter Blow owned 6 slaves. He sells one of his slaves, Dred Scott, to an army surgeon, Dr. John Emerson. After purchasing Dred Scott, Emerson takes him to Fort Armstrong in Illinois from Missouri. Missouri was a slave state, but Illinois banned the institution of slavery in its constitution. In 1836, Emerson moved with Scott from Illinois to Fort Snelling in the Wisconsin Territory in modern-day Minnesota. Slavery in the Wisconsin Territory was explicitly banned under the Missouri Compromise. In 1837, the Army ordered Emerson to Jefferson Barracks military post south of St. Louis, Missouri. Emerson left Scott and his wife at Fort Snelling, where he leased their service out for profit. By hiring Scott out in a free state, Emerson was effectively bringing the institution of slavery into a free state, which was a direct violation of the Missouri Compromise, the Northwest Ordinance, and the Wisconsin Enabling Act. Later that year, the Army reassigned him to Fort Jessup in Louisiana. That's where he married a woman named Eliza Irene Sanford. The next year, Emerson sent for Scott and his wife Harriet, who proceeded to Louisiana to serve his master and wife. Within months, Emerson was reassigned back to St. Louis. While en route, Scott's daughter Eliza was born between Illinois and Iowa, making her a free person under national law. By 1840, Emerson's wife Irene returned to St. Louis with their slaves, while Dr. Emerson served in the Seminole War. While in St. Louis, she hired them out. After Emerson died in 1843, his widow Irene inherited his estate, including the Scotts. For 3 years after John Emerson's death, she continued to lease out the Scotts as hired slaves. In 1846, Scott attempted to purge his and his family's freedom, but Irene Emerson refused, prompting Scott to resort to legal recourse. Having been unsuccessful in his attempt to purchase his freedom, Dred Scott, with the help of his legal advisors, sued Emerson for his freedom in the Circuit Court of St. Louis County on April 6, 1846. They received financial assistance from the family of Dred's previous owner, Peter Blow. It was expected that the Scotts would win their freedom with relative ease. By 1846, dozens of freedom suits had been won in Missouri by former slaves. Most had claimed their legal right to freedom on the basis that they or their mothers had previously lived in a free states or territories. Scott himself once lived in a free state. Following 2 unsuccessful appeals, the case looked hopeless and the Blow family could no longer pay for Scott's legal costs. Scott also lost both of his lawyers when Alexander Field moved to Louisiana and David Hall died. In 1853, Dred Scott again sued his current owner, this time John Sanford, but this time in federal court. President-elect James Buchanan wrote to his friend on the Supreme Court to ask whether the case would be finished before his inauguration on March 4, 1857. He had hoped that the decision would crush the unrest in the country over the slavery debate. He successfully persuaded Northern Justice Robert Cooper Greer to vote with the Southerners to not give the appearance of a sectional divide. Republicans fueled speculation as to Buchanan's influence by publicizing that Chief Justice Taney had secretly informed Buchanan of the decision. Buchanan declared in his inaugural address that the slavery question would be speedily and finally settled by the Supreme Court. On March 6, 1857, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled against Dred Scott in a 7-2 decision. This decision ruled that enslaved people were not U.S. citizens, had no standing to sue in federal courts, and that Congress could not prohibit slavery in U.S. territories. This pretty much declared that the Missouri Compromise of 27 years earlier was unconstitutional, and helped speed up the US Civil War. So while Minnesota wasn't directly involved with the decision, nor was it really a central part to the story, Scott used Minnesota, a free state, to argue that he should be given his freedom. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court disagreed. Stick around for next time, where I go over how Mississippi became the only stain on the GOAT president Calvin Coolidge's legacy.